people like you help move the world forward. Because you're just never satisfied. But I realize like that's part of your superpower that actually makes you who you are. Everybody is going to have a shadow side. You are responsible as a leader to then put the facilities in place to protect other people from your shadow side. And I think that's really important.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the New Rules Podcast. It's your girl, Breezy, and I'm here with the wonderful, incredible, the most authentic person you have ever heard in your headphones before.
Adrian.
No!
I am so used to being on the other side of this. I didn't know
See,
what to
it's
say.
weird, right?
Yeah.
It's like, hi, guys.
I didn't know what to say. I was kind of like, I was waiting for something else, and I'm like, oh yeah, I gotta say my name. What's up, Bree? How are you? Bree took the intro today. I see you leading things. Good job,
Yeah,
Bree.
look at me. Leader, naturally.
Natural born leader. There we go.
How are
Bree.
you doing?
I'm doing well. It's been a long day, but excited about the pod today. Kind of one of my highlights of the day. So I'm excited to get to it today.
Awesome. Well, if you are here listening to this podcast, we just want to say thank you. This podcast is all about unlocking authenticity and empowering the authentic leader because we believe that it leads to human flourishing. So we're super grateful that you're here. And if we have added any value to you or we add value to you during this podcast, we just ask, please leave us a review. Do us a favor. Show us some love. Leave us a review so that we can keep at it and we know that we're actually helping people out.
That's it. We will read the reviews too. So I like
reading
the reviews.
Even if they're spicy.
Yes.
Like if you hate the podcast, leave a review.
I know,
if you love the podcast, leave a review.
I know. Just wherever you stand on the podcast, just let us know. Again, it is always really, really helpful as we try to put out there just the content that we're doing for whoever wants to be in the community, be a part of the community where it's actually being helpful for them.
Cool. Okay, so to start us off today,
all right,
it goes with our topic.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you a question. We're just going to jump right in.
Let's do it.
Can you tell me about someone who has had the greatest emotional impact on you?
Wow. The greatest or just an impact or just?
The greatest. And it could be, we can add in a situation in there. It could be like a life circumstance or it could also be a person.
Wow.
And it could be good. It could be bad. A little bit of both.
Wow. Greatest emotional impact. I mean, I would say because of longevity, I would say my wife. I would say Wendy. And I think from a standpoint of the greatest emotional impact I think she's had is like she's been like a stabilizing force. So in my life, like, I mean, she has a lot of personality, but I think that because of a lot of my ups and downs, especially early on, emotionally, she always was like a stabilizing force, meaning that like she gave me room, to be up, to be down. And I think what that taught me was this idea of like the idea of, I think why it's been really impactful for me is because what she has shown has just been like a relentless, consistency. And so that's made a deep, meaningful impact on my life because, deep inside the kind of the constant life messaging is like, not good enough. Eventually people will walk away from you, whatever. And, for over 25 years, she hasn't, even through just the ups and downs and things like that. So I think that's made such a lasting impact on me because of just consistency. And so I think just, and again, hasn't been like when I say like perfect, that when I say consistency, that's not like saying that she's had no emotion or it's just like even keel. No, she gets very high emotion. She gets low emotionally. But what it's been is she's been very consistent and persistent with me toward allowing me to be who I need to be and so on and so forth. So I would say because of longevity, for sure, it's been Wendy.
Mm-hmm. Can you share a story about a time that was like a very big marker when you realized that that was the case? Because that wasn't always the situation for you. At least that's not what you would have expected, especially out of marriage as a young boy. Mm-hmm. So can you share about a time where that became more obvious to you that she was going to be able to be there for you and support you in that way?
Yeah, it was probably, I mean, there's a bunch of different moments, but I'll never forget. This is probably maybe... 5 years ago, maybe something like that, to where we were, maybe a little bit longer than that, but we were sitting there just talking, and she just looked at me and she was like, I really get it, and I get you. And I was like, well, I was kind of like random. I was like, what are you talking about? She was like, I used to always get frustrated because she was like, I feel like you were never satisfied. Like, I'm the type of person, like, we move into a new house that we've wanted, or like, a dream becomes a reality, and like wild stuff. Like, I used to randomly pray about walking out the back of my house and training kids in the gym. And that literally happened, where I walked 22 steps off the back of my house to like an indoor basketball training facility. Like, it was something that wild. And even when I moved into the house, it was one of those things to where I was like moving on to the next thing, but we got to do this, and what's next? And so she was always like, I just want you to be able to enjoy stuff. And one day she just looked at me and she was like, I get you. She was like, people like you help move the world forward, because you're just never satisfied. And for so long, I just wanted you to enjoy it. But I realized, like, that's part of your superpower that actually makes you who you are. And so it was that moment where it was like, man, she like understood me and got me, instead of seeing it as just as negative, because it wasn't like I was just trying to be negative for the sake of being negative. But I think for her, because she's glass half empty a lot, it was hard for her to understand that. And so for her to be able to see that in that moment, there was something that was so like striking to me, realizing that, man, like, she was willing to, like, she just got me, you know what I'm saying? And on top of that, was willing, she had to go through stuff in order to get to that point, but she's never quit on me. And so that moment really, really marked me in such a profound way.
Mm-hmm. Can you share a little bit about a person or a situation where of someone who was leading you? Maybe obviously she does that in a lot of ways, but you're also equals in many ways too. Yep. Can you share a different situation?
Yeah, I can think about 7th grade. Miss Willis, my U.S. history teacher. I wasn't a great student, as I've mentioned before, but history is the one thing I didn't really have to study for. And Miss Willis, when I was in the 7th grade, she grabbed me after class one day, and I was getting like B's on my history test. And she looks at me, she's like, if you actually studied, you could get A's. I know you don't study because I know you know this stuff. And she was like, you're a lot smarter than you think. I know school's hard for you, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to really help you. And so what she did was that every once a week, she would meet with me. And she would meet with me, and not just only with history, but it would be in other subjects. And it was the first time someone saw something in me that I didn't see inside of myself. And with no real, she was a public middle school teacher. She didn't get paid extra for this, but she saw something inside of me that I didn't see in myself, and she was willing to pull that out. And that marked me, because it was one of those things to where, and she told me, she's like, you want to play basketball in college, right? I was like, absolutely. She's like, okay, well, you're going to academically have to be at a certain level. She's like, I'm not saying you have to be a 4.0 student, but you got to figure out what it's going to take for you to become academically, to be at the level you need to be to play college basketball. I'm not saying you have to be this, but you do at least have to know what it takes, and you're going to have to get it done. And what I appreciate about that moment, she wasn't setting some goal that society says, okay, you got to be a 4.0 student. She was just telling me, what is it going to take? You got to figure that out and then go get it done. I don't care what that looks like. I'm not telling you to try to have to be, because, if you're a 3.5 student, you're going to be successful in life. She was like, no, but this is your goals. So you got to go figure it out. And she just spent time with me on her own time. Again, when, a lot of teachers were trying to get out of there. They had been there, since, getting there at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, working with all types of public, with school students. And again, my school was the easiest school to actually to teach at. And man, she was willing to do that, and it marked me in such a profound way.
What do you think, because you do this too, what do you think compels somebody to do that? Actually invest in somebody in that way?
I think a couple things. I think one, if you see something, I think when you look and you see just what someone can kind of be, they may not be, there's just, I don't know. There's some parts of it I think is innate. I know for me it's that, where I can just look at somebody and it's just like, okay, I can see that. It reminds me of the story when they talk about the statue of David, how I think it was Michelangelo, kind of the story was that where he went and I think it was Michelangelo who did the statue of David, and they said he was looking for a piece of like the marble, like, to kind of carve it. And they went around, they brought him all the best pieces of marble that was there. And then like none of them really was there. And then he was just in the back of somebody's shop, and he sees this random kind of like beat up a little bit piece of marble. And he said, David's inside there. And that's what he used. I think that so many times you can just look and see like there's something that there's something special inside someone that no one's been willing to carve out yet and give them a chance. I think that's one. I think the second thing is that when you've had it done for you, when you realize that somebody's done that for you and you realize the impact it's made in your life, you're willing to step in to do that for somebody else. You're willing to say, man, somebody did that for me and it changed my life. What if I could just take a step to help change somebody else's life just with the skill sets and gifts I have? So I think some of it's innate. I think the other thing is that a lot of times people compelled because they've seen it happen to them and they saw the impact it happened.
Can I be honest? So that
Okay.
This is one of the things that I wrestle with this a little bit.
Okay.
Because I can feel the ways, this isn't all the time, but I can feel the ways that as a leader, I want people to get better for my convenience.
Yeah.
And not always, of course that benefits them in a ton of ways, but primarily it's because it makes my life easier.
100%.
And it makes the work that we do better. But like the primary thing that I have in my mind is not because what will this do long term for their life. And so, but that's something that you care about a ton. And so I'm just trying to understand that a little bit more. Like I get it cognitively, but if I'm honest, like every day whenever I show up to work, I think it probably shows up with more of a care in my friendships. So whenever it comes to like being in the workplace and like getting a job done, I understand that people being within their skill sets, seeing that for them and calling them to that ultimately makes us all better.
Yeah.
But I don't always like feel the weight of that inside of my heart. Usually in the day-to-day operations of things, I'm like, I just want you to get better at this. And in some ways it's a reflection of how I talk to myself also. Because it's like, that's how I act, towards myself. I just need to get better at this so that it will be smoother, we'll be better kind of thing.
Yep.
I don't know.
Well, because I think that what you just said, I think that you don't like, being a burden to people. And so since you don't like being a burden to people, I think you don't want people to be, if you don't want to be a burden to people, then I think you don't want other people to be a burden to you or to other people. So it's kind of that thing. But I think it is. I think it's I think you answered your question. I think it's, and I'm saying this not because I've figured it out. I don't have the greatest at times like self-talk or like whatever toward myself. But I think when you always think, man, I need to get better. I need to fix this. Because if I don't fix this, then, I'm going to end up, I don't want to be one dependent on somebody, be a burden to somebody else. I think what that ends up happening, you just think everybody else should kind of have that kind of mentality. And I think for me, where it's a deep desire is because I think it's something, part of it for me is it's been, I think, something placed inside of me. I think it's something that's a part of like just my calling. I think it's been in there for a long time to where I just really do like want to see people just be who they need to be. Now, again, that was formed from deep places of pain where for a long time, I only remember, I'd say my 7th grade teacher, there was moments my dad would see something, somebody would see something, but it wasn't a consistent thing. And so because that was going on in my life so much that when I actually had the opportunity, I just saw such the benefit. And so from that pain, I'm like, man, how much more could people be if they actually got liberated, if they actually could really figure out who they were? And what I've also learned, too, is that, part of it is, I think, another thing, part of my faith is a huge part of that. My life, verse is a Bible verse, Matthew 6:33, about seeking first the kingdom of God and all of his righteousness, and everything will be added unto you. And pretty much what that is, that I've learned if you're about God's business, God will be about yours. And I know God's in the business of people. And so I just have said, man, I'm going to take care of people, no strings attached. We'll see what happens. That doesn't mean at times I'm like, I don't have an expectation. But also, now that's a little bit different. I have to know that I'm supposed to do that. My time becomes even more valuable right now. So because my time is valuable, I just don't pick anybody anymore. Before I was just like, hey, everybody. That was part of my codependency. So kind of all the way around your question, I would get to, I think some of it's just how you view yourself. I also think that's okay. That, sometimes that's your mentality. I think you just have to keep digging in. The key, though, is like, even if it's from the wrong place sometimes, is to keep going. Because the more you begin to do it, the more you'll see it. And I think, honestly, you probably do it more than you actually think you do it. Because for you, I know that if you have this thought, sometimes because you're a perfectionist, that if you may even have more positive, like, man, I just want to do this for the benefit of someone else. But if you do have those thoughts and you do think deeper about, well, my motive's really this, even if you only think about that 30% of the time, you're going to think it's 100% of the time, So I think that's another part. I think you I think you're a harder critic on yourself than actually probably as I think you're not thinking as negative as you actually are all the time. I think, do you think negative probably like that for your own benefit? For sure. But I don't think it's as much as you think.
Well, part of why I ask is because it's giving power away is such a very real struggle and like a very real conversation in society today. And I feel like that's a lot of what you're touching on. Like that's what your teacher did for you. And it was so beneficial for you. And there's always this idea that, of thinking that I'm better than the person who is the CEO who's, hoarding power and like making poor decisions and, not decisions of integrity, which I think is true. I think I do have high levels of integrity. But at the same time, it's like the more responsibility that I get, the more I can understand like how easy it is to be blinded by those things. And so I understand just pragmatically, I understand why, the HR rep in a big corporation doesn't really care to completely enhance the skills of the person on their team because practically they don't want to lose them. Practically, like they don't want to send them away or they want them to stay there. And that isn't always a conscious decision. I think it's more subconscious. But that's part of why, I was asking the question because I think it is a very real thing that happens today.
Yeah, I think people don't. Listen, as we're recording this podcast, we had a historic moment yesterday where the Speaker of the House was voted out. And when you really look at it, it's all about who can be in control and be in power. It wasn't about what was the right thing to do or whatever. But my point of why I say that's all you're seeing in politics now. It's no one's thinking about what's the right thing for other people. They're thinking about what's the most important thing for them to keep in power. It's because we've said it before, we live in such a scarcity mindset. And so that's kind of how things are built. If I lose this person, that makes my life inconvenient now. Now, man, this person who I've trained up, I've now got to train somebody else up or they're going to leave and now I got to take some of their workload, for example. Man, I don't want that to happen because why? It makes my life inconvenient. But what you come to realize is that you're going to lose them anyway. This is what I've come to realize. When you try to keep someone, and that's your whole job is to keep them, you may keep them a little bit, but eventually they'll leave. And anybody that's good enough that can really help you, they should. I've learned, you can't keep people. And when you really raise up really good really good leaders, when they know you're for them, they're way more loyal to you. They want to be around you. They want to stay with you because they know you have their best interest at hand. I think a lot of times people want to go do something different because they want to explore something new. But if you're always keeping them in the same place, of course they're going to go to a new organization. Why wouldn't they? You're not giving them new opportunities. Of course they're going to want to get more pay because you're not giving them new opportunities. Of course they're going to want to, go somewhere else because you're not empowering them to take on some new responsibilities or to try something, to test something. That's why around here we have something called Future Forward on Fridays. Why? I don't care what project you work on. Work on whatever project you want to. It can have nothing in the world to do with anything in our world. It has, because why? Because I want people to know, man, go be creative. Go work on a side hustle. Do whatever you want. Because why? Because I want you to know that, man, you can still be great, work here, add real value, but also pursue things that maybe are like side things for you. And you know what? And there's no greater joy than what if you create a side deal while you're working here that launches you into something brand new? That's a win. That is a win. And you know what? And people, and like, I tell leaders, do you think you're going to look bad? Like, you're going to look amazing. And on top of that, beyond looking amazing, you're going to have somebody else out there who's a great, like, apologist, somebody who's a great evangelist for your organization and for you. Because they're like, man, I did this when I was working there. Listen, there are plenty of people out there. That, you know what I mean? I've done this for a long time where there's always going to be somebody else that's going to come up, and you know what? You train and you develop them and you get them prepared. And there's some people going to be with you for a long time. Some people that are called to go, and your job is just on the journey. It's just to give them your very best while they're here. Some people, that's a lifetime. A lot of people, man, that's a 5-year stop, 2-year stop, 10-year stop. Your job is just to give them the best. So when they leave, they can say, man, they should be able to say, that person, man, they sacrificed, they gave me their very best, and I'm better because of them. I think that is one of the greatest things. As a leader, at the end of your life, man, what you should care about is how many people are showing up to your funeral. Because how many people you influence. A lot of people ain't showing up to your funeral at the end of your life when you're gone because you were their boss. It's the people you influence, and I think that's really important.
That's really good. Can you share a story about someone who left an emotional impact on you a little bit more on the negative side? Or you know what, better yet, have you ever been in a situation, this ties to that, have you ever been in a situation where you have felt the pressure to not pursue what you believe is next for you based off of how you were led?
Oh yeah, for sure. I would say that, yeah, I've had a couple different moments where people who were leading me were not really emotionally aware. And because they weren't emotionally aware, how they would lead is very cognitive, this is just the next practical step. Versus when I think there's a cognitive side of things, being practical, seeing next steps, being reasonable. But I also think you have to know the person. You have to look, when you're tapped in emotionally with someone, you begin to know how they actually, you know them, you know how they operate. So anybody who actually knows me knows like that it's a lot on feel. Also that if I start to see something multiple times and I start to kind of like see it, talk about it, opportunities start to present themselves, normally that is a leading I need to maybe head in. But you actually have to know that person, and you have to really you have to be dialed in with that person. And so because this person wasn't emotionally dialed in with themselves, they weren't really emotionally dialed in with me. So what they would see for a situation with mine would be, why would you want to leave? This makes no sense. This is just this makes no practical sense. Well, most of the steps I've made in my life don't make any practical sense. Like, I mean, we call this podcast New Rules. Like, things I've done have been out of the box. So having someone who sees things practically, and that's all how they led. They couldn't lead me well. So what I would do, I'll start to second guess. I'm like, man, maybe I'm not thinking about this right. Because especially for me younger, I'm like, I don't know. Dude, I'm like this is something that I haven't seen done. So can it work? Can it not work? And then you got the person leading you kind of discouraging that. So it made you begin to think, man, maybe I'm just crazy. Maybe I don't like listening to people. Maybe I am just I'm too much of a rebel, whatever. And some of that I think that during that process, God actually used some of that stuff to like beat out of me, some self-sufficiency and stuff like that. But also what I started to realize was that, man, I really do hear and I really do have a sensing and feeling when I'm supposed to go do something. And so there was a lot where I guess, and times where, but here's what's interesting. I always tell people, regardless of what you think about faith or whatever, I always say, what God has for you has for you. And there's nothing that anybody can stop that. And even if you think, we delayed in time, no, that time will multiply. And so I always tell people, but what I always wanted to do was, regardless of how a person, like, even though they didn't see, I always wanted to make sure that I respect and honor them. And when I left, regardless, I didn't want to ever leave a place in some type of like radical, like I'm about to burn this thing down, take people with me, take clients. I never wanted to be that way because I don't think that's honoring. I don't think that's because if I did that, that's just me out of my pain responding to someone. And I felt like for the most part, I've done that.
That has happened to you, I would say, like a few times throughout your life,
Yep.
especially when you think about the theme of writing new rules. Has it gotten easier to trust your intuition on the next step that you feel like you're supposed to take? Has it gotten any harder?
No, it's actually, here's what it is. It's actually gotten easier, which I didn't think it would because the stakes go up. I thought it would be harder because meaning like, if I make a choice or take a step out and gamble, there are a lot more people that are impacted by if it doesn't work. So that's a lot more of like where, you think, oh man, no, that's gonna be a lot harder. No, I think for me, I've just learned the signs. And again, not that it's 100% like accurate all the time, but it's a high batting average where I start to kind of just know when it's that time to make this change, when it's the time to take this jump. I've learned how to test it to see. But there's always that part of you where you step out. And here's what I've come to realize. I was telling actually somebody who I coached this, where he was questioning me. I don't know if I'm making the right decision and da-da-da-da. And I kind of told him, like, go back. Look at when you made those decisions that worked. Are there any similarities to the moment you're in right now? And he was like, yeah, this, and this. I was like, okay, then go back to the decision before that decision. What are the similarities? And he kind of said, oh, these, this, and this. I'm like, okay. Are you feeling that same thing right now? Are you sensing the same thing? Are you kind of how you feel like when that moment comes, when that intuition hits, you start to like certain patterns start to happen? He was like, yeah. I'm like, no, you actually then do see it. It's just that it's always a moment from one step, from one position and kind of phase of life to the next. It's always a faith thing too. It's always a moment where it may not work because you've never been there before. And sometimes you maybe never seen anyone who's been there before. And even somebody who's been there before, you don't have the same genetics. You don't have the same origin story. So they can give you some principles, but it's not going to be just one for one. So it's always going to be a step of faith. But what you always have to do is just try to look at, man, are there any similarities from when I went from one phase to the next phase that actually worked? And just try to go back and look at those patterns. I tell people that's the beauty of getting older. You can start to see patterns and rhythms. So to answer your question, yeah, it's gotten a little bit easier. Still doesn't mean it's not weighty because, man, there's still that part. It may not work. And there now, instead of before, it's like me and maybe one person. Now, there's 3 different organizations that I lead. You know what I'm saying? With a lot of people who get paid because of it. That's a whole different ballgame.
I like what you said about though the pattern is easier to read, the cost of the risk has increased.
Yeah.
With the cost of the risk increasing, has the decision to take that risk become lonelier?
Yeah, because it becomes lonelier because you're now stepping into even new planes that, that other people haven't stepped in before. And so you can get wisdom and insight from people who know you, who can challenge you. I always tell people, man, it's okay. Today people don't want anyone that's around them. That's they would say that's a, hater, the ops, whatever. I'm like, listen, get you a friend that can act like, that they're not the ops, but they can act like the ops. Like that friend's going to question everything that you do because it makes you make sure you're thorough in what you're doing. But when you make a decision, sometimes, it's just like, yeah, dude, this is lonely because I'm out there, and if this doesn't work, and again, I'm not talking about every. Let me be clear. Every decision doesn't have to be like this thing we've been taught about rule breakers, entrepreneurs. Oh man, they just take the craziest risk. No, if you read and study, they take calculated, mitigated risk, but it's still a risk. but it does get lonelier more and more just because, again, you may be heading into different worlds. So I think the more I've moved forward, the more it gets a little bit lonelier in that decision-making process.
Up until this point in the podcast, I've been using the term emotional impact. What we actually refer to that as is your emotional signature. So all the stories that you've told from Wendy to Miss Willis, you're telling the story of the emotional signature that they've left on your life.
Yeah.
What emotional signature do you think that you left on Wendy and Miss Willis's life?
Wow, great question. I would say for Wendy, I think what I've left on Wendy as from an emotional signature is that, like, a belief, I think, in her. For her, I mean, it's more of like her to have a greater belief. I don't know even how to word this, a greater belief in herself. You know, if it was left to Wendy with her studio, she was at this little second floor of this kind of it was like right by like a doggy daycare place, and there was just like one room for her youth studio. And I was like, dude, you were killing. I'm looking around, and it was a no-brainer to me because I saw her talent, and I was like, oh, you're bringing something to the market that no one else is bringing. I mean, you're talking about bringing a high level of like excellence, talent, but also bring diversity into a market to where in the dance world, where the city we live in, to where nothing has really changed in 20 years. I'm like, oh yeah, you have something different. And I know that, like, you know, like I said, that the cream rises to the top, blah, blah, blah. And so I was like, no, you need to and it was like, you need to go, let's go find a new place. Let's find a bigger place. And that was a huge step for her and a risk. Wendy's more risk adverse. And so she did it. And she always said, she was like, yeah, if it wasn't for that for you, I still would be probably in that same building over there, whatever. And I'm the one always talking to her, hey, man, I think you should franchise this and do this. She's like, heck no. But it's just, I just really do like see her skill and her ability and her talent and her work ethic. And I just think when you have that, a talent, a skill, and a work ethic, I just think you can't miss. And so I think I've put belief in her own ability kind of in that. I think that's been like probably a thing I've left on her.
Can I ask you? And then I would love to hear about Miss Willis because I think that is so fun.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about what you just said is, you know, every great emotional signature has a shadow side. Yep. And I love when you're sharing the story about Wendy, you talked about how, you know, she can have a frustration at times with you never being satisfied. Yeah. But then that lack of satisfaction is also the very thing that fuels you to be able to, you know, put belief in her that she can do anything. So I think that's something interesting to point out too, because we talk so much about how, like the light side of our personalities, the good things that keep us going, they always have a shadow side to them that impact people as well. And even though they are our skill set and the thing that we're good at and the thing that might be, you know, authentic to who we are, we also have to be aware of how the things that, even if they're true to who we are, might negatively be impacting people because, you know, we're not perfect.
No, that's a great pickup. And again, I think that, yeah, it does, because our shadow side, it's everybody is going to have a shadow side. And it's important for you to know that and how your shadow side impacts people, because it's not that it's not going to impact people. It's just what you're trying to do is lessen how it does that, and how that shows up for people, and how some people can handle it and some people aren't responsible for it. Wendy's married to me. Like, so, yeah, she's going to feel the brunt of the shadow side more than anyone else. But there's some who work for me. You know, you feel the brunt of my shadow side more than other people do because of proximity and the role that you play within our organization. There's some people who work for me who aren't supposed to feel any of that. And I think that's important. I think so many times what we've done now and kind of people being a little bit more open in our world and workplace, they think everyone should feel, well, this is just who I am, and it's kind of part of, you know, you have to live with the good and the bad. You're like, no, some people don't need that. They're not responsible. They're not in a position for maturity. Also, they're not even in a position of authority within the organization to feel that. So you have to learn how to like realize how you show up so that when you walk into a room, I can't let my shadow side really go a certain way in certain rooms, as best as you possibly can. But in certain rooms you can, and people know that. As I'm reading the book on Elon right now by Walter Isaacson, there's certain people. I think that's the gift of Elon, but the curse of Elon, his shadow side, it'll show up everywhere. And I think that's caused a lot of the negative you hear of Elon. They call it demon mode when he's there. They're like, he's just in demon mode. Like, that's the negative of Elon that everybody hears. And the body bags that he has behind him from a workplace standpoint is because he allows his shadow side to go everywhere. And so versus like, man, no, I think no matter what, I know that he has Asperger's and things like that. So, but with something like that, it's still that idea of learning how then to put, like, then you have to, if you have things, then you have to put real clear boundaries and parameters. You are responsible as a leader to then put the facilities in place to protect other people from your shadow side. And I think that's really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something that I was thinking about whenever you're talking to is that I think there are parts of your shadow side that can show up because of, the skill sets that you do have mm-hmm. that are good and that you're meant to bring into the world. And then there's also parts of your shadow side that's like, yeah, that doesn't really need to be there.
Yeah.
Like, that's just, you're just being mean. Yes. Like, you're just being a jerk. And then, yeah. Can you share a little bit about Miss Willis?
Yeah, I think if I say the emotional signature I would probably bring to Miss Willis was that when you get to know me, there's this real like just comedic side of me.
So goofy. Yeah. Most people don't know that, yes, but incredibly goofy.
And so I think she saw that. I think I let her have fun because I was very much so when she used to say that to me. She was like, as I would work with her, she's like, I get to see a side of you that I never thought that was even a part of you, because I was always kind of quiet, She would see moments in the hallway when I'm with my friends, but for her to get to see that and stuff like that I think was part of it that made it fun for her, because I look forward to when I know someone loves and cares for me and believes in me, then I'm going to show up with my absolute best for them. So I would show up. I probably showed up to Miss Willis. Almost every time we would do tutoring, I would show up to her the same way I would show up to a basketball practice. I was excited to be there. And I was excited to be there more than anything else because of, here's the how she made me feel. It was not what she was teaching me. It was how she made me feel. And it was just a feeling of belief. And so I was going to show up my very best. So I think that made it fun for her. And, and went from there.
What emotional signature do you think that you have left on New Rules Collective?
Yeah, I think I belief, but maybe even curiosity, because I'm always trying to get people to get to the why. Why can't we do this? Why can't we try this? Why are you doing this? What's the motive behind it? Is there a different way? So I think you just made people. I think belief. I think curiosity. I also think an emotional signature I can leave on people is I want to say conviction, but it's more of that idea of feeling challenged. I think when I get around people, I think they walk out of a room and I think they feel challenged by maybe something I said or something I communicated or tried to push them in a direction towards. So that's what I would say. I don't know. What do you think? Yeah. So what do you think?
I would say that you make me and I think the organization more comfortable to face the good, the bad, and the ugly. I think that you do this in every situation, but it's kind of like holding up a mirror to New Rules Collective, and if you're with me, holding up a mirror to Bree, and saying together we're gonna look at this together. You're not alone. We're gonna look at this together, and we're gonna be really, really honest about what it is that we see. But we're also gonna have a lot of fun at hoping what it could be in the future. But we're gonna do both of them together, and I think that sometimes, especially in the world today, we can get really comfortable talking about our, shadow sides and our flaws. And there's a difference between like speaking about it comfortably and speaking out it with a sense of urgency and conviction.
Yeah.
And I think that whenever we talk about it, it's not so that you can just listen to it. It's not in that sense. We talk about it because it's a serious thing, and there's a weight behind, like, we have to face this, and we need to seriously consider it, and we need to speak it clearly and know the weight behind that.
Yeah.
And I think that it's a beautiful thing, but it obviously comes, with its shadow side too, especially when people are in the mix, because, and we talk about this even organizationally too. It's like, well, when you are challenged, when most people are challenged, what they feel is shame. They don't feel love and care.
Yeah.
And so then you have that wrestling between, like, did I just beat this person down? Or are we having like a really negative view about where we are as a company right now? Yeah. And now we're ashamed of like the work that we produced. But really we're trying to challenge ourselves enough to still be able to move forward. Yep. And look at it with the right perspective. But because we're humans with emotions, I feel like a lot of us can tend to go towards shame. Yep. Especially because most of us here are pretty self-critical.
Yep.
And so it's, carefully managing that tension between challenging ourselves and being brutally honest about where we are, and learning how to grow resilience. Yeah. So that we don't allow, shame to consume us, which essentially just keeps you in the same place.